Well, hey there, it's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol. That's wavetables.lol, home of KRC Mathwaves, the world's largest collection of wavetables, single-cycle waveforms, and even some samples for all sorts of modern synthesizers, including our new friend, Arturia Pure Lofi, which, believe it or not, is a wavetable-based synthesizer. And I wanted to share like a kind of a look at this very interesting sounding instrument, and also talk about some hidden features that it has. This very interesting wavetable synth supports both samples, and it has a wavetable oscillator that it calls a lo-fi oscillator, and then also multisamples. And those multisamples are actually basically just SFZ files. And it turns out that you can import your own wavetables and your own multisamples into this instrument if you know where to look. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So hooray, another thing for us to use Mathwaves with. And also the varieties of noise sample library is completely apropos for use with this instrument. So let's get into it a little bit. So last week, Arturia released their V Collection 11, and drink time. The V Collection 11 includes some new instruments, including this one, Arturia Pure Lofi, which is described as a lo-fi synthesizer. Let's just check out the product page here. So over at Arturia, it's Pure Lofi. They call it a low-fidelity synthesizer. Go-to instrument for authentic lo-fi sound, blend acoustic samples and digital oscillators, apply the charm of vintage samplers, and dial in an instant degradation with the powerful lo-fi processor. So, that's actually a really quick and good overview of this. Now, the pricing on this is $149. There is a demo, which I didn't realize, actually. And I bought it as part of V Collection. Now, I know there's been some whinging online about the pricing on V Collection because it didn't really seem to have a great intro price. There's two levels. You can get like the full thing, which is like all of the what Arturia calls its virtual instruments. I don't think it contains pigments, but I already had pigments, and so like at a loyalty price, I was able to get V11 Intro, which includes Arturia Pure Lofi for $99. So I kind of look at it as I got Pure Lofi for $49, and then the Mini Freak VST for another $49, and I'm like, okay, that seems fair enough. But then I also got a bunch of other stuff that's in the V11 intro. Play something, Keith. And I sort of bought it on spec because when I heard about this instrument, and I heard that it had a wavetable oscillator, I was like, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that it either supports the same format that Pigments does, which is just your standard 2048 sample per frame wave format wavetable files, right? Which I have hundreds of thousands of in KRC Mathwaves and another 39,000 of in KRC Orchestral Impressions. And so I was like, I bet we could do really interesting things with this synth. Now, one thing that's kind of funny about it is that it doesn't have an interface option for importing wavetables, which I think is a little strange. Neither does it have an option for importing multisamples, but it does around the interface have ways of importing like one-shot samples. So I guess we should talk about the different oscillators. Let's get out of one of my presets and let's look at the included collection. Now, I guess at one level you could say that Arturia Pure Lofi is sort of a reskin of Pigments. It is similar to Pigments in some ways. Or is it a sample library? Because it has some really great presets that are very vibey. That you could imagine using in the lo-fi genre or retro soundscapey things. Ambient really comes to mind. Liminal ambient, especially. But beyond having a bunch of great presets, it is actually a very capable synthesizer. And so it's not, it's not really like, some of these things that I would say Arturia does this to a certain extent, as well as Native Instruments, where they're commonly packaging what are essentially a set of samples with a customized interface. And they're kind of, simple instruments. I don't know if cheap and cheerful is the right word for them, because buying a lot of these things can become pricey after a while, right? Sometimes you might consider things like that a bit of shovelware. It's like, well, here's a bunch of samples and a playback interface, and let's put a price tag on that. This is really different, because it's a full-featured synthesizer. Let me go into, let's see, one of my own. Sorry, I'm not really good with their browser. Some of my own patches that I've made so far. It's got, quite a bit of range, but it excels at these kind of degraded sounding patches that are both, whether they use the sample oscillators or not. Whether or not they use samples, they have kind of an old school sampley flavor to them because of the lo-fi oscillators. Okay, let's just take a look at the synth. I mean, this is one of the synthesizers I've been having a lot of fun playing and programming, and I've been saving a lot of patches and presets, and that's how I know when I really like a synthesizer or a library. It's like, how much do I use it and how much do I customize it, right? So on the face of it, Arturia Pure Lofi is a 1-layer, 3 oscillator-ish synth. Maybe you might call it a 2.5 oscillator synth. That has 3 types of oscillators. So it has this lo-fi oscillator. Let's solo some stuff, shall we? So we can just hear it. So first up, there's the lo-fi oscillator. And the lo-fi oscillator is essentially a wavetable oscillator. I think in the marketing, there is some implication that there's some level of analog modeling going on, but I don't believe that that's true. The waveforms themselves are actually just packed into wave format wavetable files, and there are some very interesting and to me new, I don't think these are in Pigments. They have very interesting transitions in them that really fit the genre. So there's basic wavetables, but there's like interesting versions of them, right? Like this is the basic synthesis waveforms, but they're clipped, right? So they give a lot of, kind of distortion. So the wavetables themselves are sort of degraded and lo-fi as befits the genre. Let's maybe turn off any modulation on this so we can just hear the full range. So this is a rounded saw. Like we've seen these in KRC Mathwaves, right? I'd like to think that maybe Mathwaves is a bit of an inspiration here for some of this work. Here's a rounded square. It's like it's already filtered, right? We don't really need to have the filter on it to get a filtery sound. So we can adjust the timbre. So they label this knob timbre, but it's clearly actually wavetable position. And there's a nice assortment of wavetables in here that come with the product, but we can greatly extend the capabilities of the synthesizer by importing our own. Now, as I mentioned, there's not a facility built in, and there's nothing in the documentation about importing your own wavetables. But I found immediately upon buying it, let's see, that if we go over to ProgramData, so ProgramData on Windows is like a hidden system folder. You can show it if you want to. Let's go all the way up there. So it's just on your C drive, right? And it'll be at the very top level, and it's hidden by default. But, you can go to View and then Show Hidden Items, and it'll show these secret folders like ProgramData. And so all of Arturia's like core software stuff, you can see the different things I have installed here, like Pigments and Mini Freak, and I guess I did augmented strings so far, and then Pure Lofi. All of the system files for those are in the ProgramData folder, and you can just navigate to it. And inside of resources, we will find all sorts of directories, and I've now lost it. Which directory was I looking for? That's why I have my notes, kids. So let's see, Arturia samples. Okay, so it's not under Pure Lofi. You actually go up to Arturia, okay, and then under samples, here we go. Now we have samples, Pure Lofi, and then underneath Pure Lofi, we've got a factory directory, and that's where the factory content is. See, multisamples, noise samples, we'll get there, sampler presets, samples, and wavetables. And so under wavetables, there are, let's sort these again. Sort them by date modified. So here are the factory ones. So there's the analog wavetables in this directory, right? We sort of saw all of those. Here are the basic ones that we were just browsing, okay? But it turns out that if you just drop a directory of waveformat wavetables into here, they will show up in the interface the next time that you restart Arturia Pure Lofi. And you're not damaging anything, and they work very well. So I just went and grabbed a bunch of my more recent Mathwaves wavetables. And so this is the wave format. These are the ones that in KRC Mathwaves or in orchestral impressions would be labeled serum/vital. I should probably add like /pigments or /Arturia to that, but those are the ones that you want. And if you just drop a folder of wavetables in, like the M series here, these mathematical series waveforms that I talked about in my last video that actually work really well with Pure Lofi, they'll become available to you the next time that you start Arturia Pure Lofi. Similarly, I guess while I'm on the topic, even though we haven't talked about the oscillator, the oscillators in full yet, there is a directory for multisamples, and under multisamples, under factory, right, you will find all of the included content, but you can also just drop folders that are full of SFZ files. So if we look at the content that ships with the product, the multisamples are provided just as SFZs. And if we were to open this like in Notepad, we can see that this is really just a standard SFZ file, and that references all of the required samples that are underneath that folder. So if you, like me, have like some huge directory of SFZ files from another product like Dimension Pro, you can just go in and you can just drag folders of content into that Multisamples directory, just copy them over, and then they will appear in Pure Lofi the next time that you start it. So I don't know why Arturia didn't provide a way to import these like yourself, as in Pigments, right? We can import directories of wavetables. In this case, we need to actually physically digitally copy the wavetables into that specific folder. And there'll be a link in the description. There'll be some text in the description, as well as links in the description to everything that I talk about today. There's always links in the description, right? But maybe they intend just like to sell more factory patches and stuff like that. I don't know, because all this works pretty well. At one level, like maybe this isn't an entirely finished product yet. There's a couple other issues with it that make me feel like maybe it was a little rushed just to meet the debut of. I got to get rid of this. This is bothering me in the background. What was I saying? What was I saying? I just lost my place. Anyway, maybe they rushed it to, meet the launch date for Arturia V Collection 11. We can't be sure. We don't know. So anyway, let's go back to the oscillators. So you've got the lo-fi oscillator that we talked about. It's basically a wavetable oscillator. The timbre knob controls the wavetable position. And like I said, there's a bunch of cool wavetables in here. Let's see. If we go into advanced mode, I could just show you really quick how we can modulate that position. So we'll talk through some more of this stuff, but kind of like in Pigments, you've got 3 different modulator bins here. I forget what they call it in the documentation. But these 3 things can be either an envelope, a function generator, a random generator, a voice modulator, or a mod sequencer. And so in addition to the built-in amp envelope and filter envelope, it's very handy to have, you can have some custom envelopes. And so if I go over here, this will be called envelope 1. And if I hover just above it here, I've got a little draggy, and I can just drag it onto anything I want to modulate. And so now we're modulating the timbre knob, the position knob, with this envelope. And let's turn that all the way up. And then let's just give us a little like attack decay. It has infinitely variable slopes on the shapes, which is nice. Let's change these to be roughly the same, shall we, with our release. And now you can see that this envelope is modulating the timbre knob. And we're morphing through the wavetable, and we can hear any of the built-in wavetables. You can hear how these are like a little bit lo-fi and rolled off and like cool in a lo-fi context, right? The other thing that the lo-fi oscillator has is, and this is really what makes this product unique, I think, these kind of hardware modes are in both the lo-fi oscillator and the sample oscillators, and they emulate the bit depth and resolution and maybe the DAC behavior of some classic sampling synthesizers. So we've got a clean mode, which is our purest playback mode. But then we also have emulations of various devices, and it's a very exciting list. So we've got the Fairlight CMI. You can hear that aliasing already, right? And there's a certain noise to it as well. So you got a Fairlight CMI. You've got the Emulator 2. That's the EMU emulation. It's a little bit of a darker sound, but 16 bits, I think, rather than 8. You've got an emulation of the Casio SK1. I have an SK1, and I love my SK1. Every nerdy kid in the 80s had an SK1, and you would make fart noises into it, or sample little snippets from the radio. It's beautifully degraded kind of sounds, very low bit rate, very low sample rate. There's an emulation of the SP1200. Which is a little bit kind of crunchy sound, and it has a little bit more high end. Then there's the Akai S90 sampler. And it does occur to me that this might be better illustrated with the sampling oscillator, but I just want to show you that this is here. And then the original Akai MPC, which is kind of beefy, but has some noticeable aliasing and noise. And so these are almost like filters already before we even hit the filter section. And they can give like a really lovely character to things. One thing that's really fun to try with importing your custom wavetables by the little hack of dropping them into a subdirectory of the factory wavetables folder is like you could do my microwaved collection samples. So I was really disappointed with the Waldorf microwave. Did they do the XT or the original microwave? Anyway, the Waldorf microwave VST, you're not able to import your own wavetables into it. But based on being inspired by that instrument, I did a whole series of that one's not designed for sweeping. I did a whole series of what I called microwaved wavetables, and you can't really see it in a lot of cases. You can see it here, but they're very stair-steppy. What I did is I took some of my existing wavetables and then did a really brutal interpolation on them, like down to 8 bits. Modern wavetable synthesizers expect like 32-bit wave files. But what I did is I emulated going down to 8 bits. So you see all these stair-steppy regions, and those stair steps are just the 8-bit values that we're locking to over the course of the wavetable. There's also microwave wavetables were actually only stored as half. So the first part of the waveform actually is upward going, and then the second half of each waveform in the wavetable is just a flipped version of the first one. So they have this like symmetry and lack of DC offset that's kind of unique to them. And then they only support 8 bits of amplitude values. So my microwaved wavetables emulate that sound. And so when we combine that with these other hardware modes, they're very gritty. So those are really fun. The other thing I'm thinking about this synthesizer is I am thinking about doing a subset of wavetables that are chosen just for this and make it another one of my cheap and cheerful $5 products. Let me know in the comments if you're interested in a wavetable and sample collection for Arturia Pure Lofi. Anyway, that's the basics of the lo-fi oscillator. Then we've got the realistic instrument. So realistic instruments are multisamples, and they're those SFZ multisamples that I showed you a few minutes ago. And again, we can use our own. There's a bunch of really nice, very lo-fi appropriate samples that ship with the product. So you've got bells and mallets. Now there's not a ton of them, which I find interesting. Nice vibraphone, right? That's a pan drum. Lots of cool, appropriate stuff. You got a little bit of brass and woodwind. You've got some guitar and bass. One thing that I found is kind of interesting is that there's not a lot of or I don't think there's really any kind of hits or even drum kits or chordal type of stuff that's included here, which I would associate with lo-fi hip hop or contemporary lo-fi genres. So in terms of the factory content, it seems to be about building your own chords and actually playing the instrument. But it can be greatly expanded by using your own samples that are like hits and strums and things like that. So it's some nice content. But what I did is I copied a bunch of those Dimension Pro SFZs, which, by the way, here's a really great tip. These are from Digital Sound Factory. Let me just go and get something. Let's go to I don't know, orchestral. Let's get the Arco strings here. So Digital Sound Factory is a company that has the rights and all of the original recordings of, I think, all of the samples that went into the Ensoniq and Emu products, at least from the early 90s on. And so you can go and get all of these samples as SFZs. It's really beautiful content that you've heard before, because a lot of classic tracks used those old emu modules. I mean, very, very 90s romplery stuff, right? And it sounds great when you decimate it with one of the hardware modes, like the emu emulation. Okay, so that's the realistic instrument. Now there's one bug. At least on Windows, there's this, instead of the timbre knob like you have on the lo-fi oscillator, right? Here this control is called timbre. In the realistic instruments, again, which are multisamples, there's this start position where you're supposed to be able to move this up and cut off the initial attack of the samples. But I don't hear any difference between the extreme ends of the start knob. So whether it's 0 or at 100%, there's literally no difference in the transient. So I reported that as a bug. The manual kind of makes a big deal about this. It spends at least a paragraph on this. And then a couple of the factory patches seem to attempt to use it, but I guess no one noticed that it doesn't work. Maybe it works on Mac. I don't know. By the way, I'm hoping that an astute watcher of my channel will tell me in the comments what's the equivalent of the ProgramData folder on Mac. Like, where does this Arturia factory content live on Macintosh? Because you could do the same trick, but I just don't know where it lives. I don't have a Mac around here, so you'd sue me. Okay, so that's the realistic instrument. That's the little bug with start. Another thing that's really weird about the realistic instrument. Let's go oscillator. Let's go over to our old friend Morris White. I love these old Ensoniq samples of Morris White from Earth, Wind & Fire. Which can be used to build really beautiful patches here in Pure Lofi. One thing you'll notice, though, I'm going to turn off the effects, and there's no loop in release in the realistic instruments. So it's the samples loop properly. So unlike in Serum 2, where there's some issues with certain SFZ files not looping, your imported and the built-in factory multisamples will sustain while the note is held down, okay? But they release, they don't loop and release, and there's no option for it. And I think I just spit at you. Sorry, if you saw spittle flying toward you, it's because I'm upset about this. There should at least be an option to loop and release. Like you can see that my amp envelope, right? My amp envelope has a really, really long release. I'll turn the release all the way up. And you can hear the vinyl texture, the noise texture oscillator still going there for a second. And if we had a lo-fi oscillator over here, you'll hear that ring out, but the samples don't continue to ring. And so that's like a huge oversight that I consider a bug. So I reported that as, this is dumb that it doesn't do that. It's not a deal breaker for this instrument, but it's like samples, the multi-samples should loop and release. Okay, so that brings us to the third type of oscillator, which is called Creative Sampler. And the Creative Sampler is pretty cool. Maybe we should go to a patch where I actually used that. Do we have one where I used that? Let's see here. I think there's one in here. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. Where is it? Did I use it in Orientalism? Maybe we'll just play through until we find it, eh? We'll find one that uses the creative... Oh, here's one that uses the Creative Sampler. And this is using both a sample, a realistic instrument, a multisample that I imported by dropping it into the factory content, but also the Creative Sampler is using some of the files from my Varieties of Noise sample library. Now, the Varieties of Noise sample library is a freebie that's included with KRC Mathwaves. Get KRC Mathwaves at www.wavetables.lol. It's usually $29, but you can get it for $20 right now with discount code Sandra. There'll be links in the description and also somewhere over my head. And so part of that collection is a collection of samples from the San Francisco wave organ. Let's turn our multisample off. And the wave organ is this weird art installation that was made for the San Francisco World's Fair. And so in this Creative Sampler, I have dropped these different wave organ samples. So a bass note, another bass note. Are they all the bass notes? 3, 4. Oh, yeah, so 4 bass notes and a drip percussion. And one interesting thing with this Creative Sampler is that you can just play like a single selected selected sample, like A, B, C, or D, depending on if you have anything loaded there, right? Or you can play them in round robin and random mode. So round robin is going to cycle through them on each key press, and random is going to select one at randomly, which is super cool. And the individual individual sample slots here can load, anything that you've told it about. So there are some single hit samples that come with. That's kind of fun. Let's replace this one with chimes. Weird. Let's go to selected real quick. So here's this wind chime sample, and you see you've got all sorts of controls over the tuning and the root note. Things can be looped, so you could do forward and back and forth, and you can set the loop points right in for each individual sample right in here. So now this one will loop back and forth. There's also a loop fade parameter here where we can make a crossfade. Pretty cool, right? So that's really fun. Now, in the Creative Sampler, It does. When you go to load a sample, there is a folders thing, and we can add a folder when we're under here. So, I've got all these different like hits. I can select one of these now, and I can add new folders just by clicking the Add Folder button. I have no idea why there's not an Add Folder button for the Wavetable oscillator and an Add Folder button for the Multisample, the realistic instrument um, uh, oscillator. It's just really weird. So let's see. We could just go and say like, I want to be able to import these high string samples. Let's see. If I do folder, will it nest the folders? Yeah. And so it'll even show you nested folders. So let's see. Oh, these are all very low in volume because they're like floating point. These are a bad example, but you see that I can just add folders, and now I can, whoops, don't remove it. I can just, go back and I can use all of my different, you double click to select a sample. And so you see here, you can hear it, right? Like this sample will continue to play. It'll continue to loop in release. So I don't know why the realistic instruments don't do that. But the Creative Sampler is super fun. And again, there's a lot of cool samples in varieties of noise that you could use here. But where they really shine, let's go down here. Let's go back to our wave organ. So the third type of oscillator that we have, so in these first two slots, you can have, you got lo-fi oscillator, creative sampler, or realistic instrument. There's the third oscillator, which we might think of as like the second and a half oscillator, is a noise oscillator, and it plays samples, and the samples that come with Pure Lofi are all different types of noise, and they're very interesting and well selected. So you've got things like various kinds of aliasing. You've got, amplifier noise. This one called 1963 is sort of vinyl crackly. It's got some vinyl crackle stuff. And then like some nature samples that are they're very sort of ASMR-y, I guess, in a way, but really nice. So the idea in this instrument, right, which is it's very opinionated in a way, right? It's like for making, lo-fi-ish sounds. And what it wants you to do, is use a mix of wavetables and samples and play them over a noise texture, or incorporate them with a transient. So in addition to these kind of beds, that's maybe just, what does this sound like if we've got our watery things and our beds going on? Let's see. Yeah. Random. Yeah. Oh, I didn't actually select that sample. So you'll see right now, I've got this tinkling water loop. This is from Varieties of Noise. And so what I did is I added my folders with like the wave organ samples and then the Varieties of Noise samples into here. And then I can select all these different things. And Varieties of Noise, it's like this instrument is built like perfectly for Varieties of Noise, because there's not just like loops, but there's a ton of different noises. There are also things that are that are like little transients, and so like this guy, like Doppler impulse. So there's two modes here. So you got noise texture and noise transient. This is a little clave sample. So the other things in Varieties of Noise is some modular drums. These are drum sounds that were made with my modular synthesizers, and there's lots of different things in here, including weird little beeps and bloops. But some are specifically transients. Like, let's see. So like, here's like a little ceramic transient. This one called boop. And so we can use those as well. So in transient mode, this is just like a transient that's going to play. And you can tune it So it's a little bit like it's a little bit like a de minimis sort of wave sequencing idea, that the waves aren't really sequenced, but you're kind of mixing a transient with a body kind of sound, right? And that's what the start knob is supposed to be for, but it doesn't make any difference. So anyway, theoretically, eventually you'll be able to graft transients onto your sampled instruments, or even to your lo-fi oscillator instruments. One thing that's nice is that you can have keyboard tracking on or off. It's off by default, but if we tune keyboard tracking on, did I say tune? I meant turn. See, now this transient sample will track the keyboard. The other thing you can do here, like sometimes that's too extreme, right? And so I have this idea I've talked about in other videos of enharmonic attacks, where you have an attack that doesn't track the keyboard perfectly, right? Since we've got a tune knob and it can be modulated, you can actually put your own key track on it. So like down here, you've got like mod wheel, you've got key track, you got velocity, like all the common things you'd want to do, including MPE. And all these can modulate almost any parameter. So we could take key track and put it to tune, but just use a tiny amount of key tracking. And now that kick transient only changes pitch slightly as we go up the keyboard. And that's a very pleasant effect when you have like a noise transient. All right, so that's the three kinds of oscillators. So then all of those sources, so like, two different types of oscillators and then a noise transient or a noise texture, can be run through a filter section. And there's three types of filters. So there's the clean filter. Let's actually run everything through the filter. You've got little buttons down here to control the routing. So we're running both engine 1, engine 2, and the noise through the filter now. So the clean filter is, I guess like a digital filter. It's got a bunch of different modes. So high pass and low pass modes with a notch with different numbers of poles in them. And then there's an analog filter. The analog model filter is, it's pretty saturaty and distortiony, as befits a synthesizer like this that focuses on lo-fi stuff. And they're only really in one flavor. They're all 12 dB, but there's a low pass, band pass, high pass, and notch. And of course, it's completely modulatable. And there's a dedicated envelope right here. We're making filter face, aren't we? And then all of that runs through a dedicated effects rack, which you can turn on or off, with a really great assortment of effects, including a pitch shifting delay, like here. We could actually add that into this patch, I suppose. And then, so you can see the signal flow, like, is really nice, right? Like, I really like this interface. It's a little like Pigment's Light. It's easier to get to grips with, I think, than Pigment's. The one thing that's a little bit then unexpected is that, the signal flow is kind of going from the top to the bottom. It gets run through this thing, this lo-fi processor, which is clearly, kind of a tape emulation sort of thing, but there's different flavors of it that do kind of different things. Let's turn the lo-fi amount all the way up. Actually, let's start, and let's change our patch back, shall we? Let's change back to our wave organ patch. So with the lo-fi amount all the way down, this is that's the cleanest version of the signal. We can introduce more and more lo-fi-ness by moving this big knob up. This is also modulatable, by the way. And we can get like a lot more degradation to the sound. I compare that to that. And there's different flavors. So some are warmer, some are more electronic-y. Some are warm, and some are neutral, and some are cold. This one's warm. Velvet Frost is sort of cold. It's kind of biased toward the high end. And then there's all these individual parameters that you can adjust. This is maybe not the best patch to demonstrate this, really. Let's turn our wobble all the way up so we get some weird pitch instability. Just all together, this makes for like really cool, evocative patches. And you know, this trick of emulating the different sampler modes. Here's just a simple hit, like one oscillator patch going on here, where I don't even have effects set up yet. I was just testing how the creative sampler works in this patch, but there you go. You can really hear the lo-fi effect coming in. This one's very distorty. Anyway, the trick of having all these different device modes is really cool. Here's the SK1. Combine that with a bunch of lo-fi. This will get really crunchy. The trick of these different device modes is just awesome. And I can't think of another synthesizer that has this. So to my mind, like if you're into, as I am, like sample fuckery and you have like a huge sample library and you're always looking for new ways to play with your favorite samples, this is a great playground for that. And I think, you know, if you can get it while there's still the intro special on V Collection, you know, you can get this for $99, along with a whole bunch of other stuff that you may not have yet. And I think it's a good value. I mean, as long as you have a normal wavetable synthesizer already, whether that's, you know, Modwave, which is my favorite, or Multipoly, or Serum 2, or Phase Plant, something like that. You know, if you don't yet have any sort of wavetable synthesizer, I would say get one of those first and like save this for as an add-on for some other time. But you know, there's no other synthesizer that does this. Now, Native Instruments Machina in its sampler does have, I think, an SP1200 and an MPC type emulation. But this one sounds better, and there's a lot more options here. Just being able to turn on, you know, a Fairlight emulation is really cool. So, you know, you get lots of different interesting sounds out of this. And I will probably revisit this synthesizer in the future because, I mean, I'm definitely going to keep programming it for my own purposes. I mean, it's so fun, right? But we'll probably revisit this once because I think I am going to introduce a cheap and cheerful product with some specially selected wavetables and maybe even a few more noise samples just for use with Pure Lofi. There's that wave organ thing again. So this patch is using the two lo-fi oscillators with some of my custom wavetables. These are some of them are actually the most recent ones, the mathematical series waveforms. They just sound really cool. And the third type of filter, I guess I didn't talk about, is this lo-fi filter. It's basically like a bit crusher. So it does filtering via bit crushing, and it's got some kind of complex controls. You can hear as we drop the frequency all the way down, we get really extreme bit crushing going on. This is maybe my least favorite of the filters, but it is useful in certain kinds of patches like that one. And even though it's not as, this is not quite as sophisticated of a modulation environment as you would find, say, in something like Phase Plant, it's perfectly adequate for the types of sounds that it pushes you in the direction of. And so, as I mentioned, you've got these three different slots that can be LFOs, that's function, or random things, or envelopes, and you can mix and match them. There are also a dedicated amp envelope and a dedicated filter envelope. Also, there's kind of a hidden, like a hidden third LFO that controls vibrato. So you've got an expression section over here where you have velocity to amp already set up for you. So that's a modulation you don't have to set up. You've heard me bitch in previous videos about the fact that a lot of sound designers never even bother to make their patches velocity sensitive, which you should almost always do, unless you're emulating, I don't know, a 303 or something, which we also done a video about. Anyway, there's a vibrato control here, and if you just click this little gear, you can set the different routings. So you can do mod wheel to vibrato. So let's set it up really high here. You can do aftertouch to vibrato, and you can have a fade on the vibrato. And you can also control where this, I guess it's sine wave. I think it's a sine wave LFO, but it might be a triangle. Anyway, you can set it to control different things like the pitch of engine 1, the pitch of engine 2, filter cutoff, amplitude to get some tremolo in there. And so now, as I move the mod wheel up, we're getting all sorts of modulation. So that's kind of nice. So there's really sensible modulation routings built into the thing, including like envelope amount on the filter, right? So it's just a really cool synthesizer. Arturia Pure Lofi, super fun. And the factory content is really pretty nice. But as I showed, we can kind of hack our way to having even more options. Did we play through everything that I've done? Oh, no, we haven't, really. You can do stuff. Let's see. Let's go here. I mean, it's just really easy to get this awesome sounding stuff. And again, here in the noise transient oscillator, we're using one of the varieties of noise waveforms. This is in the modular drums, I think. It's called Enhance. And it makes a really cool transient. And then when it's run through all the effects and the lo-fi, it's hard to say lo-fi processor because you want to say lo-fi processor. Anyway, it just sounds really great. We can do like hits. Just beautiful stuff. Importing your own multisamples to the realistic instrument by doing the technique I showed toward the start of this video, like really can enhance your options here. So like I'm using some of these old Emu multi-samples here to get these cool Vox in there. There's not, I found it weird actually, then the factory set, there's really not, I don't think there's any voice stuff in the multi-samples. There are only, voice samples for the creative sampler. Oh, one other thing that's a little bit weird is that when you're creating your own, like your own mini patches inside the creative sampler, let's go back to our, let's go back to that wave organ patch where I had customized the creative sampler preset quite a bit. There's no way to save a preset here. So, I did all this work to like add these 5 different samples and set them up the way that I want to. But then it seems like the only way that you can save a preset for the creative sampler is by saving the preset itself. And then you don't have any control over it. All you can do is you can just find the original factory creative sampler presets. But see, under voices, there are like some vocals. But there's no multi-sample Vox, which I find a little bit weird. So I guess at the end of the day, this is just a really interesting, what do I say about it? I guess it's an opinionated synthesizer, right? That kind of pushes you in a certain direction. And I find that direction very pleasing to explore. Did we cover all the weirdnesses? So multi-samples don't loop and release, yeah, but you can add your own if you know the hack. Yep, can't save presets for Creative Sampler. Oh, the noise texture, it feels like this should have a modulation for the start position. When you've got the noise texture going, you'll see that what happens is that it continuously plays through the sample as long as like the patch gate is open. So as long as there's a voice sounding it continues to move. But if you have a short attack, or sorry, a short decay, it looks like it randomizes the position. It might be cool to be able to control that a little bit better. And I think, and sort of the same thing with transients. I could imagine wanting to change start position on the transients. That's a minor nit, I suppose. But I would like that. And then, yeah, the start knob in multi-samples does not do anything, at least on Windows. But there you go. It's super cool. Hey, like and subscribe for more talky synthesizer content. Go to wavetables.lol, check out orchestral impressions and KRC Mathwaves. I've even got some patches for multi-poly up there. KRC Mathwaves you can get for $20 using the code that's down in the description, and you will have more wavetables than you can shake a stick at, literally 160,000 and plus, and growing all the time, plus the varieties of noise sample library, which is very useful with Pure Lofi, because it's got transients and sustained noises. It's almost like I had a vision of the future and thought of this product. Anyway, it's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol signing off, and I will talk to you later.
Computer controlled.